The Habs offseason just got crazier as a new report links them to a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Is Sidney Crosby heading to the Montreal Canadiens? We're going to break all that down and much more coming up on this episode of Hattrick HQ. But before we dive into all that, just want to give a huge shout out to all your guys for your continued support here on the channel. We just hit our goal of 17,000 subscribers. We're on the road for 18,000. If you want to stay up to date on all the news around the NHL this offseason, make sure down below and hit that subscribe button. But Darius, with that said, we got some huge news coming from Elliotte Friedman today, stating that Sidney Crosby could be a future Montreal Canadien. This is what he had to say here. He said, "I think this is going. There's a world there's a way that Crosby leaves Pittsburgh." Saying a lot of people would like to see Crosby go to a contender or an up and coming team, whether it's a team like Colorado or Montreal. And I don't think there's any better team in today's league, Darius, than the Montreal Canadiens in regards of up-and-coming teams. I mean, making that huge jump to the playoffs this year. And I just think adding a guy like Sidney Crosby, a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, a 2-time Hart Trophy winner, and a 2-time Conn Smythe winner, just adds so much experience to this much-needed young roster. And I think it is the perfect move for the Kent Hughes and the Montreal Canadiens to give up a little bit of the, draft capital and young prospects that they have acquired to go out and get a once-in-a-lifetime talent in Sidney Crosby.
Well, I'll get into why this makes sense for the Montreal Canadiens in a second, because it really does. Obviously, I think most teams would want Sidney Crosby at this point on their team. But when you really look at it and what Elliotte Friedman's talking about, I mean, the Four Nations face-off was a breath of fresh air. Let's face it, the Pittsburgh Penguins are not competitive anymore, and we have no idea when they're going to be. Kyle Dobes continues to strip them down for assets, and they had 3 first-round picks this past weekend, and these guys are not going to develop in time to play with Sidney Crosby. He's creeping up on 40 years old, and his play hasn't dipped, but, at some point it's going to once he reaches, that 40 plateau. So the fact of the matter is the Pittsburgh Penguins are not competitive anymore, and seeing him in the Four Nations face-off in games that were competitive, that meant something for championships, was awesome. He was playing at the top of his game, and again, like Connor McDavid was probably the shining star in that tournament, but Sidney Crosby was great, right? It's like he turned back the clock. It was awesome to see him in that environment. So obviously I think fans around the league would like to see him playing competitive games again, and maybe with, Nathan MacKinnon that's been thrown out there to the Colorado Avalanche. But boy, oh boy, Casey, you're right. Does it make sense for him to go to the Montreal Canadiens? If you look at the Montreal Canadiens, what do they need right now? What have they needed for the past 10 years? Centers, center depth. And this wouldn't be just center depth. This would be your second line center, I guess, at this point, behind Nick Suzuki, which is weird to say. Maybe he would be the first line center, but you would add him, and there you go. You have your 1-2 punch, line 1, line 2, your 2 centers solidified. And, he would obviously help. And I wouldn't even classify Montreal as an up-and-coming team. I feel like they have actually arrived. We were all expecting them to be an up-and-coming team this past season, but they made the playoffs. There's a couple of factors that allowed them to make the playoffs. But heading into next season, they just added Noah Dobson. A lot of these guys are a year older. A lot of these guys have playoff experience now. I would expect them to make the playoffs. Again, that's the expectation at this point. They might not be like a second seed, but I would expect them to make the playoffs at this point. If you add Sidney Crosby, you're just that much deeper. You have that experience. You're a dangerous looking team. So I wouldn't even consider them up and coming. If they were to add Sidney Crosby, they would definitely be in the mix. So it's going to be very interesting, but we're also going to get to another report about Sidney Crosby that, it's not very likely that he leaves Pittsburgh. But again, in today's day and age, in, sports, anything can happen at any moment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you said it perfectly. You said the hockey world is better when Sidney Crosby's in the playoffs, and Pittsburgh has kind of been in a slump these last couple of years, and he's going into the tail end of his career, and the production just hasn't dropped off for Sidney Crosby. He's still 37, going into being 38 at some point this season, having a 91-point season with 58 assists and 33 goals. I mean, he's Sid the Kid. He is a generational talent. There's no doubt about that. Going into a fresh deal as well, a fresh $8.7 million deal, which brings him up to the time he's 39 years old. And for the Montreal Canadiens to actually make this trade happen, Darius, they're going to have to explore all options, because right now, after the Noah Dobson extension, they have $94K in cap space heading into the season. So it's tight in Montreal right now, but they definitely have room to make it work. I mean, what I'm looking at right now, obviously the 2025 picks are over, but going into the 2026 draft capital that they do have, they have 2 seconds, they have a first as well. And I think if you're going out and getting Sidney Crosby, you had to free up some cap. So maybe we're looking at a guy like Josh Anderson here, who's on, I believe, about a $5.6 million deal, and then maybe a lower end $3 million deal that will have to be pushed out in this trade. But I definitely think a trade package for Sidney Crosby definitely looks like a first round pick, maybe a young prospect in a guy like Logan Mailloux. I mean, Montreal's defense is stacked right now. They don't really need that guy, and that's where I'm starting with this trade. Do you think that's something that maybe Dobes bites at, or do you think they're going to need more?
No, I think that could be something that he wants. He wants assets right now, and they're selling off. I think that Pittsburgh, it's interesting, is the only team in the league right now that's selling. I don't know if this has ever happened. Seems like every other team is trying to get better, and Pittsburgh's the only team selling. And I don't know if any teams necessarily want what they're selling at the end of the day. But, when you look at the draft picks heading into next year, I feel like a lot of GMs, especially Kyle Dubas, really values first-round picks next season. Because while I just mentioned that the Montreal Canadiens should be expected to make the playoffs, there is the possibility that they don't. And if they don't, that means they would be in the lottery, and that means you have a shot at Gavin McKenna, who is, considered a generational talent at this point. So I do think that would interest Kyle Dubas. Like you mentioned, some salary would have to come back the other way. The Montreal Canadiens to the Pittsburgh Penguins. They can afford it. Pittsburgh can take on salary. They're looking to take on salary as long as you're giving them the assets that they require and they need. And they're looking to make these draft picks. They made a ton of them just the other day in the NHL entry draft, but at the same time, they're looking to flip assets to then get players on the team that are, everyday NHLers that are ready to go and impact players. So they're looking for any types of assets right now, draft picks, younger players, could be guys who can make an impact immediately. So they would be willing to take on salary. So I'm not worried about that. You brought up the cap hit, and that Montreal, is right up against it right now. I'm not too concerned about it. If they wanted to make this trade work, they absolutely could. It would be easy, I think, for them to get this done. But again, it's just the fact of the matter. Is Sidney Crosby, does he want to leave Pittsburgh? And I'm not so sure right now, but again, anything can change. In another losing season, you might be looking at the clock and going, I'm running out of time.
Yeah, I know. Like, this is the crazy world we're living, where we're talking about Sidney Crosby not being a Pittsburgh Penguin. I mean, it doesn't feel right, but I definitely think it is, like you said, a trade that Dobes will definitely look at. It's not something he shuts down right away, in my opinion. I mean, getting draft capital back on a team that's probably heading into a rebuild very soon is definitely worth it for their organization. But, I mean, looking at Sidney Crosby coming back to Montreal the other way, like you said, I kind of have him slotted in as the 2C here. I mean, Montreal's top line was so good last year. I don't think you touch that at all. I mean, I think Sidney Crosby immediately comes in on the second line here with a guy like Patrik Laine and Ivan Demidov, who ripped it up in the playoffs for the Montreal Canadiens. I think having Sidney Crosby on a line with Patrik Laine is only going to make Patrik Laine even better. I mean, you have one of the best playmakers of the last 2 decades in Sidney Crosby with a goal scorer like Patrik Laine. That's only a recipe for success, in my opinion. But that lineup looks lethal already. Their defense looks unreal, and I mean, the goaltending situation a little bit up in the air for Montreal right now, but when you got that good of a team in front of a goalie, what else do you need? You know what I mean? Obviously, Montembeault's still there. I think he's going to be the goalie going forward, no doubt about it. But like you said earlier, there is a report saying, Sidney Crosby could stay in Pittsburgh, from Elliot Friedman again, saying, I feel he's loyal to the logo. But Darius, one point I wanted to bring up to this quote was he was also loyal to another logo early on before he started playing in the NHL, and that was the Montreal Canadiens, as he was a Montreal Canadiens fan growing up. So I think if there's any other way that we see Sidney Crosby not in a Pittsburgh Penguins uniform, I think it's in a Montreal Canadiens uniform. I don't think he goes anywhere else but Montreal.
I truly believe this, that I think the most likely outcome in this whole scenario is that ultimately he probably stays in Pittsburgh. But like I said, another losing season, anything can happen. You might start looking at the clock and say, listen, I want to go compete again. I want to play some meaningful hockey. The only 2 places that I can see Sidney Crosby going, and I don't know how the first team makes it work, is the Colorado Avalanche to play with Nathan MacKinnon. That's one option, of course. And they could use another center. Of course, Brock Nelson's there, but that was a very puzzling move in itself. But if you look at the other team, it's the Montreal Canadiens. He grew up cheering for the Montreal Canadiens. I don't see him going anywhere else besides those 2 teams, and those are the only 2 reasons. He grew up cheering for the Montreal Canadiens. they're now on the come up, right? The Pittsburgh Penguins are down at the end of his career. The Montreal Canadiens are on the upswing. I could see him joining them, offering some wisdom and everything that he's learned through the years to the younger guys on the team and helping out that franchise for everything that, that franchise, I guess, gave him growing up, being a fan. And then, of course, the Colorado Avalanche as well, trying to win a Stanley Cup. That's a competitive team and playing with Nathan MacKinnon, which I know, they love to play with each other from the same place, right? So it's going to get interesting, but ultimately, I think he stays in Pittsburgh. But man, it would make a lot of sense, and it would make the Montreal Canadiens a lot better.
Yeah, definitely a great point there. And quickly, before we wrap the video up here, Kyle Dubas did comment on the Sidney Crosby trade rumors that have been swirling online, saying there's no change at all. Anything from our perspective, everything that we're doing is about bringing the team back and being a contending team. And our hope is that Sid will be a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins, but kind of leaves it up in the air there. Darius saying our hope is that he is going to be a Pittsburgh Penguin, but it is definitely going to be an interesting few months heading into this season. I can't wait to see what unfolds here. I want to hear your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section. Do you think Sidney Crosby leaves Pittsburgh to either join the Montreal Canadiens or the Colorado Avalanche? Love to hear your guys' thoughts down below, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting comments to read there today, Darius. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I've been your host, KC, alongside my co-host, Darius. We'll catch you in the next one.